Take your wallet out and find a bank card. Look at the front. There is a small gold square sitting near one corner, roughly the size of a baby fingernail, with a faint geometric pattern etched across its surface. You have inserted it into card readers thousands of times without giving it a second thought. It goes in, you wait a moment, you tap your PIN, and the transaction completes. The whole thing takes about 2 seconds. But inside that 2 seconds, something genuinely remarkable is happening. That small square contains a fully functioning computer. It is running cryptographic calculations, generating codes that have never existed before and will never exist again, and communicating with a bank server potentially thousands of kilometers away, all without a battery, all in the time it takes you to reach for your receipt. The story of how that came to exist, and why it replaced the technology it succeeded, is one of the more quietly consequential engineering stories of the last 50 years. To understand why the chip matters, you have to understand what it replaced and why that replacement was necessary. From the 1960s onward, payment cards used a magnetic stripe along the back, a thin band of iron oxide particles that could be magnetized to encode information. The technology was borrowed directly from audio tape recording, which itself had been developed in Germany during the 1930s. Applying it to payment cards was straightforward and cheap, and for several decades it worked well enough. The fundamental problem was that a magnetic stripe is a passive storage medium. It holds a fixed set of information, and that information is identical every time the card is read. Your account number, expiry date, and a verification value are encoded on the stripe, and every swipe transmits exactly the same data to exactly the same destination in exactly the same format. The stripe has no ability to vary what it sends, verify who is reading it, or detect that anything unusual is happening. This made it extraordinarily vulnerable to a form of fraud called skimming. A skimming device placed over a legitimate card reader could silently capture the stripe data from every card inserted into it. That captured data could then be written onto a blank card, creating a clone that was functionally identical to the original from the payment system's perspective. The bank had no way to distinguish between the real card and the copy because both transmitted the same fixed information. Card fraud built on magnetic stripe cloning became a multi-billion-dollar annual problem across the global payments industry, and the stripe's passive architecture meant there was no technical fix available within the format itself. The format had to be replaced. The concept that eventually solved this problem was proposed by a French inventor named Roland Moreno in 1974. Moreno's insight was deceptively simple but genuinely radical for its time. Instead of designing a card that merely stored information and handed it over whenever asked, he imagined a card that could process information. A card with its own computing capability that could participate actively in a transaction rather than just supplying data passively. He called it the smart card, and he patented the concept at a moment when the microprocessor itself was barely 3 years old. The technology required to make his idea commercially practical at the scale of a payment card did not exist yet, and it would take decades of miniaturization, manufacturing refinement, and international standardization before smart cards became viable for mass deployment. The EMV standard, named after Europay, MasterCard, and Visa, was established in the 1990s and provided the common technical framework that allowed chips from different manufacturers to communicate with terminals from different vendors across different countries. The global rollout that followed was one of the largest coordinated infrastructure upgrades in the history of consumer finance. The gold square you see on the card is not the chip itself. It is a set of metal contact pads whose only function is to make electrical contact with the metal pins inside a card reader. The chip sits beneath those pads, embedded in the card body, invisible and protected. It is a piece of silicon a few millimeters across, and it contains everything a functional computer requires. There is a central processing unit that executes instructions. There is read-only memory holding the operating system and the cryptographic algorithms the chip uses. There is a small amount of working memory for temporary calculations during a transaction. And there is a protected memory area where your account credentials are stored in a form that cannot be read directly by anything outside the chip itself. The chip will perform calculations using those credentials and return results, but it will not hand the raw data over under any circumstances. This architecture means that even if someone physically removed the chip from your card and examined it under a microscope, Extracting the stored keys would require defeating security measures built into the silicon at the manufacturing level. The chip has no battery. It lies entirely dormant in your pocket. The moment you insert the card, the terminal supplies a small electrical current through the contact pads, and the chip wakes up with just enough power to complete the transaction. The mechanism that makes chip cards resistant to the cloning attacks that defeated magnetic stripes is called dynamic authentication, and it works through a process of cryptographic challenge and response. When the chip powers on inside a terminal, the terminal sends it a challenge, a piece of data unique to that specific transaction at that specific moment. The chip combines that challenge with the secret keys stored in its protected memory and performs a cryptographic calculation that produces a unique transaction code called a cryptogram. This cryptogram is transmitted to the bank along with the transaction details. The bank performs the same calculation independently and verifies that the results match. If they do, the transaction is approved. If they do not, it is declined. The critical property of this system is that the cryptogram generated for your morning coffee cannot be reused for anything else. It was calculated using data specific to that transaction, and once the bank has seen it, it is permanently expired. An attacker who intercepted the complete data from that transaction would have a cryptogram that the bank would instantly reject on any subsequent attempt, because the bank has already seen it and knows it cannot be legitimate. This is what the magnetic stripe could never do. It could store your account number, but it could not prove that it was genuinely your card producing the transaction in real time. The chip can, because the secret keys required to generate a valid cryptogram never leave the chip's protected memory. The card does not give away its secrets. It uses them to prove its identity without ever revealing them, the same principle that underlies most modern cryptography at every scale. Roland Moreno's 1974 insight that a payment card should process information rather than simply store it, took 50 years to become the global standard for consumer payments. The gold square you tap against a reader without thinking about it is the end result of that journey. A computer smaller than a fingernail, running without a battery, generating a unique mathematical proof of identity in under 2 seconds, and expiring that proof the moment the transaction is done. Ordinary objects, when you look closely enough, almost always turn out to be extraordinary ones.